On January 16, 2000, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn decided we've had enough of World Championship Wrestling's bullshit. We are off to WWF and greener pastures. Vince McMahon, Triple H, and so many others will feature us properly, even though Triple H was nowhere near the executive, absolute, power-hungry individual that he is now. They'll feature us better. And yeah, about that, they didn't necessarily feature them all that well after losing their tryout matches. They aligned with Triple H, the man that beat them in the goddamn powder. And then injuries and bad creative pretty much nullified the whole Radicalz thing within the blink of a thigh. That was all over, and they were just a few of the boys, even though they were really talented, and maybe in the case of Dean Malenko, his best years were behind him. He still had something to offer. Yeah, the Radicalz didn't end up working out all that well for a variety of reasons I'll talk about in this video, but maybe the reason that the Radicalz didn't work out all that well is they were missing one key component, a franchise impact player, if you will. Somebody that was a triple threat, not a protection, but of ability, promo, and just overall star power. Somebody that could be the franchise piece. So let's talk about what could have helped the Radicalz. I'm John Redland with my real honest thoughts on what if Shane Douglas had joined the Radicalz in 2000. So, first of all, let me know your thoughts in the comments, please. And second of all, I apologize to whoever requested this about a year ago at this time. Maybe even just a little over a year ago. I did a lot of what if videos and put them out. Ones on David Von Erich and various others. And then, unfortunately, time got away from me. I had a lot of weekly stuff I was doing, a lot of work, and a lot of movies. So I apologize to whoever that individual was that I did not get back to you and present this. But also, yeah, again, time got away from me. That being said, I am going to talk about what each individual was doing. Eddie, Benoit, Dean, Saturn, and Shane Douglas. And I will preface this by saying, I don't think Shane Douglas would have lasted all that long in the WWF at that time because of injuries, personal habits, and he wasn't the only one with personal habits. But Shane Douglas has talked about this. Apparently, he was rumored to be part of the Radicalz, go with them, and that didn't end up working out all that well. That's why you didn't see him on television for, that and a couple of reasons. After he beat That's the Wall Brother at Sold Out 2000, it was a mess of a goddamn show for reasons I've talked about in other reviews. And basically the fact Vince Russo, who was no creative genius and never had a good idea in his life, was ousted as booker, and Kevin Sullivan was brought in. And yeah, there were people that had issues with Kevin Sullivan. Shane Douglas could have gone to the WWF, and I'll talk about why near the end of this. But I'm going to start by talking about Eddie Guerrero. And these pieces won't necessarily take all that long. I'm not going to go into minute detail on everything. But starting in 1999 WCW, that was a tumultuous year for WCW because after making a profit, I believe turning a profit for the first time in a while at the end, sometime at the end of 1995. Could have been October, November, December. I'm not necessarily certain. Bischoff did cut costs. They brought people in. They were doing well. Nitro was doing pretty well. They were competitive with Raw from their debut. And the pay-per-views, while, yes, we could try to overlook the various issues with them, we can't overlook the fact that the Yeti showed up and helped dry hump and DP Hogan at the end of Halloween Havoc 95. If you are a new viewer and you are unfamiliar with Halloween Havoc 95, watch the pay-per-view. You could watch the television leading up to it and see that Hogan was doing the dark side stuff. But the whole point is, you have Eddie and Benoit, you have Malenko, Saturn would come in sometime in 97, he would leave ECW, but we just focus on 1999 WCW. So Eddie was recovering from injuries after a New Year's Eve car crash. And he returned way too early. Way too fucking early. I believe he returned at the end of May 1999. I believe he faced Hoovy. I want to say on the following Thunder, if I recall correctly. I'm trying to remember if that was a Nitro or a Thunder he returned, but he did face Hoovy. They were still, the whole LWO thing. The LWO thing would have, dissolved really quickly anyway, had it not been for Eddie's accident. I mean, this was not necessarily something that had long legs to it. But Eddie was still in great shape, but you could tell that unfortunately vices had gotten hold of him. Now, yes, he got over that, and that whole thing the circumstances that led to his death. He was clean of drugs, at least hardcore drugs and stuff like that. And I miss Eddie to this very day. No wrestler's death hit me harder than Eddie Guerrero's. But the Filthy Animals, he teamed with Ray and Conan. Kidman would join a little bit later. He would team with Ray, and they would do that. That would pretty much, especially be after Eddie would leave, that Kidman would be featured a lot more prominently. And even though Kidman and Ray were a really good team, and Conan, let's be perfectly honest, Conan by this point, hard bumps and his style has started to take its toll on him. I mean, he would wrestle a little bit in NWA TNA, but by 2003-04, he was really starting to feel it. They feuded with the Deadpool. That was ICP and Vampiro. They actually faced off in 2 respective pay-per-view matches back-to-back. That was Road Wild 99 and Fall Brawl 99. And he did end up, feuding with the Revolution. Even though he was friends with Benoit and Malenko, they were known as the Three Amigos. I really feel bad for Dean. But, the fact he lost 2 of his friends, his best friends, and also the fact that he's dealing with, I believe, Parkinson's, if I'm right. He's just not, it's really, really sad. But he feuded with Shane Douglas, Dean Malenko, Chris Benoit, Perry Saturn. That whole Revolution thing, it would take almost an entire video to explain just how messy that whole thing was. Suffice to say, it was a good idea to have younger guys rise up, except for the fact they said Shane Douglas is a younger guy. Shane Douglas had been wrestling since in the early, well, maybe the late 80s, but still, injuries and stuff had basically taken away a lot of his prime. And he made his own decisions. He made his own choices. A lot of wrestlers do. But he was good as the talker. Shane was always a much better talker than he was a singles wrestler. Now, he was a tremendous tag team wrestler. But at the Revolution, it was a good idea, to be fair. And the feud never really took off. I believe, if I remember right, Eddie faced Saturn at Halloween Havoc 99. I did retro view that, but I don't recall that match ever really getting out of first gear. Feud with the Revolution, I believe, was a mixed tag at Mayhem. He wasn't even on Starrcade or Sold Out in 2000. Starrcade 99 sold out 2000. During the lead up to Sold Out 2000, Sullivan replaced Russo. And Eddie, along with others, they really didn't think that it was a great idea to stick around and deal with Kevin Sullivan. I think it was also due to the fact that Eddie Guerrero had done everything he could to get elevated. I mean, feuding with Chavo, being a great heel. I mean, he had one of the best matches in WCW history, at least in the modern era of WCW, the latter half of WCW, facing off against Rey Mysterio at Halloween Havoc 97, almost at 99. That wouldn't have made any sense, since I said he faced Saturn then. But Eddie had his time in the sun, had his run, did get his release granted a few days after the pay-per-view. So he did say in interviews, we were the backbone of that company. When they lost us, they lost the backbone. And to be fair, he wasn't wrong. It's hard to replace guys that talented, especially when you don't have guys that are ready. And even though they had a bunch of guys under contract in September of 2000, October, they sent Bischoff home right before Fall Brawl 99, and they were releasing a ton of guys that were on big contracts that weren't really used. Sandman has said he sat home for 6 months after being signed, getting paid $5,000 a week, and then showed up as hardcore hack. Fitting, because he was a hack in the ring. Couldn't wrestle a lick, but didn't need to if they featured him right. And then he was gone, I think, after a year, and then joined ECW again. So that's it for Eddie. Eddie right there, that summarizes him. He's off to WWF/E. So we go to Dean Malenko. He teamed up with Chris Benoit. They were still part of the Four Horsemen, even though the whole Horseman thing, after Flair had returned, after Fall Brawl 98, feuded with Bischoff, became president, abuse of power, all that. They made Flair look like a goddamn idiot. And Flair didn't need any help looking like an idiot if you look back at some of the stuff he did. But just as a performer on screen, they made him look like a fucking idiot. So Super Brawl 9, it was, I believe, 2 more falls of a 2 out of 3 fall. It was some kind of convoluted thing with a tournament to crown new tag team champions. They were against Wyndham and Henning for the tag team titles, and they did end up losing. They, ended up also getting, a match at Uncensored 99, and the Horsemen disbanded in May of 99. Dean, by the way, had some of the best matches on WCW television and on pay-per-view. I mean, he faced off against Rey Mysterio, I believe, on a Clash, if I remember right. I think it was a Clash in August of '96, but he did. He would hit that gutbuster off the top. And Dean, at this point, Dean was born in 1960. Dean, at this point in '99, he's approaching 40, and with his style, even though he was safe, the toll does get taken on the body. So he really only had a few years left. He probably thought, well, okay, it's hard to leave guaranteed money, but I'm getting frustrated here. And I don't blame him. I mean, think about it. Dean wasted some of his prime years, even though he got to have great matches. Him and Eddie, Super Brawl, well, they might have had some of the Super Brawl. Starrcade, 97, great opener. Tremendous opener. May 99, Horseman Disband. He joins the Revolution. Feuds with DDP and Canyon. Faced David Flair for the U.S. title at Bash at the Beach 99. He lost. He lost to David Flair. I know there were all kinds of shenanigans, all kinds of bullshit, but yeah, David Flair beat Dean Malenko. That right there proves that David Flair is one of the worst second-generation talents to ever exist. So, his last match, this is after feuding, teaming with the Revolution, doing the feuds that they're doing. Wasn't really much of note. He faced off against Kidman at a catch-as-catch-can, in a catch-as-catch-can match. The idea is you can't leave the ring. I mean, if your feet hit the floor, that's it. You can go the apron if you want. I guess. Maybe. You can go the apron because technically you're still in the ring side, on the ring and everything. But he went to the floor to regroup, and that was it. And people say, oh, it screwed up the timing of the pay-per-view. No, that pay-per-view is already fucked anyway because Bret Hart was injured. Thanks, Goldberg. And Jarrett, I believe, had a concussion. So he was out for a bit. He would return Super Brawl, or return shortly after it sold out in time for Super Brawl. But he faced Kidman. It was like a few minutes. He went out to the floor, and that was it. So they kind of had to do some stalling and everything, and they had to reformat stuff and make matches go longer and everything. But that's okay, because they just threw about 18 million matches on pay-per-views at that point in WCW. And even though Sullivan was booking, Sullivan was a lousy goddamn booker at this point. I've never really had much in the way to say, positively about Kevin Sullivan, even though I do not believe that he had anything to do at all with the Benoit, tragedies. The fact that Chris Benoit killed his family. I believe that Kevin Sullivan did abuse Nancy, and I do believe that part, but I also do not, buy into this whole thing that he somehow is such a devil-worshipping person. Nevertheless, since Dean Malenko lost, Dean Malenko's getting frustrated. I mean, you could even see it on his face before that match started that he was starting to get frustrated. And nothing against Kidman. I don't know if he had a problem putting Kidman over. I don't know any of these guys personally. I'm just going based solely on all this stuff as I'm seeing it as a fan. And then we go to Saturn. Now, I'm going to back up a little bit before 1999, and I'm going to go to Fall Brawl 98. He'd been feuding with the Flock and trying to beat Raven, and the idea is if he lost to Raven, he would have to join and stay with the Flock, and if he won, the Flock would disband forever. And then Kidman would go on to win the Cruiserweight title the next night. Saturn won. It was a hell of a match, a little bit too cluster-filled with interference and everything, but still it worked nevertheless. They had him floating. He feuded with Jericho. He had a feud with referee Scott Dickinson. Scott would end up inadvertently costing Jericho the match, or not costing Jericho, but costing Saturn the match to give it to Jericho, and then Saturn would be forced to wear a dress. And then Saturn would end up liking the dresses and stuff like that, and would turn it around on him. Had a goth-like thing, weird contacts, all that stuff. Would end up putting his dress over people's faces and hitting them and everything, and they'd act all crazy because I'm not saying that the whole dress thing hasn't been done in wrestling before, but yeah, this was a little bit crazy. That being said, Saturn turned around on him. Theme set to the beautiful people, at least a version of it. And he did reunite with Raven after beating Jericho in a Doge Collar match. Such collar. At Uncensored 99. In his teaming with Raven, they would go after the tag titles. Raven got injured, And Saturn would team with Kanyon, former Flock member, all that. Canyon's like, don't worry, I'll help you. I won't screw you over. I swear. It's a lot harder to do this, when you're 43 years old. And then, Slamboree, after they won the tag titles, Kanyon, substituted for Raven. And then Bam Bam and DDP won the tag titles. And then they formed the Jersey Triad, which I wish had lasted a little bit longer. Unfortunately, Kanyon and DDP had more left to them. Bam Bam, by this point, was just shot physically. Really, really sad, honestly. That Dark Side of the Ring episode was really sad. So he did team with Benoit. He won the tag titles again. And then 7 days later, lost him back to the Jersey, what would become the Jersey Triad. And in various feuds before Sullivan felt that Saturn couldn't connect with the fans after the fans had routinely popped constantly for Saturn standing up to the Flock. But Sullivan must have been in a drunken stupor at this point or hitting another woman backstage, allegedly. But, Saturn couldn't connect with the fans. I'm not saying Saturn should have ever been world champion. I'm not saying Saturn should have ever been WWF champion. I'm not going to say that. But to say that Saturn wasn't connecting with the fans when Sullivan's best years were basically being the talking head of the varsity club. Sullivan was never the best worker, but he was never the worst worker, but he definitely wasn't as good as some people think he is. At least in my personal opinion. I never saw it with Sullivan. And he might have a great mind for wrestling, but he doesn't have a great mind for in-ring work. That being said, Saturn couldn't connect with people. Well, if you don't give people the chance to connect and you don't follow up on it, then they can't connect with people. So he went off to WWE. Sold Out 2000 was like a cleaning house situation. And then we get to the last two before I finish this whole thing up and talk about what could have happened. Benoit, kind of same stuff with Malenko. Team with Malenko, disbanded the Horsemen, formed the Revolution. They had their own flag because they felt they were separate from WCW. And then it was October, it was either 5th or... I'm trying to remember if it was the 5th, the 12th, or the 19th Nitro in October where he faced Brett in the Kemper Arena. I know that it was somewhere before Halloween Havoc. But it was to honor Owen Hart, who passed away because Vince McMahon decided not to invest in a good cable system. And that's not a pun, that's seriously it. Vince McMahon should have paid for his crimes. And I will forever feel bad for saying that Owen should be in the Hall of Fame and that Martha Hart should have relented. No, she fucking shouldn't have. And I really feel bad. That was so preventable. Harley Race was even the ring announcer. Brett and Benoit had arguably the best match in Nitro history. Arguably the best. I mean, I'm not saying argue in the comments. You can say other ones if you want. But it was a classic. It was so well wrestled. And it was a way to honor. And, Benoit was the perfect opponent. Even though he's a murderous scumbag. He became a murderous scumbag. He was the perfect opponent. And Brett wisely chose him. And they had a great goddamn match. Then Benoit, continued to team with the Revolution. Then he was out and in of the Revolution. The Revolution was getting ridiculous. It was getting to where it was disbanding by this point. And Sold Out 2000 was the end. But Benoit also had a couple matches, leading up to that, like one at Starrcade 99 and a ladder match against Jeff Jarrett. And then he beat Sid for the world title at Sold Out 2000 after Brett was injured. And then left due to issues with Sullivan. They didn't recognize his world title run because Sid had his foot under the ropes. From all that, we just, we see that he goes to Japan. They say Japan for a few weeks. I mean, I think he was only in Japan for maybe a week or so because he would show up on the January 31st, 2000. I own a calendar, I swear. But yes, he's off. So Shane Douglas now. Let's get to the Shane Douglas portion and let's just start from there. So his world title run, both of them in 97 through 99 in ECW were marred by injuries. Now he left WCW notably in 93, I believe, because of issues with Ric Flair. He kept calling Dick Flair. Like, look, Rick might have not seen that much in Shane. To be quite honest, besides a tag team wrestler, Shane was maybe a good mid-card champion He was never going to be the world champion of a main company. He didn't deserve to be. I'm sorry. He was never that good. He was an incredible talker. He could get a lot of anger. Sure, he had to swear some, but he still could get good reactions in WCW without being able to swear much. So he was a hell of a talker. And great tech. He was part of one of my favorite matches in WCW history, Starrcade 92. Look it up, folks. Shane Douglas was great. Shane Douglas was a great tag team wrestler. He lost to Bam Bam at, he won the world title in another triple threat. And this is after the NWA thing, they can all fist my ass. I think that's what he said. I kid. He went and became Dean Douglas. Came back to ECW. Couldn't go back to WCW. Nope, couldn't do that. Let me just preface also the rest of this by saying that I don't blame Shane for leaving, because Heyman was notorious for not paying people, because Heyman decided to get way too big, expand way too fast, and not be smart with getting more people to invest. Maybe if he had had a little more leniency, if he had just been a little more restrained, ECW might have been around a little bit more. So he lost it to Bam Bam a couple months after winning it. October 16, 97. Won it back at November to Remember about 6 weeks later. And then would hold it until just after the first of 1999. 406-day reign. He had an arm injury. I can't remember. I think it was an elbow injury. Elbow or bicep or something like that. He had one of those, Mo Vaughn gun arms. There's a goddamn, MLB reference and nobody remembers. And there was a triple threat. Bam Bam would be in the group, then be out of the group, then Candido would be part of that, and then, we'd have Storm, we'd have Just Incredible, we'd have all these people intermingling. We'd have Taz and RVD and Sabu going after Shane, mainly RVD and Taz, if I recall correctly. My ECW memory isn't that great, so if I mix up or, flummox a couple things, I do apologize. But Shane would continue to hold the title, and he faced off against Al Snow in a match that wasn't all that bad. It wasn't great, but, by this point, ECW was starting to erode. Even though their pay-per-views had some good crowds, and even though they could deliver some good matches, financially they were eroding. That TNN deal that would become Spike TV, and now I don't know what the fuck it is. I think Spike TV dissolved a while ago. I remember MXC don't get eliminated, but Bam Bam left ECW sometime in 98 and joined WCW. And then Chris Candido said, well, you know what? I'm done being part of the triple threat. So Douglas would continue to feud with Taz. Douglas would eventually be the guy to lose to Taz at Guilty as Charged 1999. And I'll be perfectly honest, I do remember seeing this match, and I remember watching at least enough of the TV back when the network was a thing instead of now it being on the cock. And I remember them hyping it up pretty well, but the thing is Shane was diminished physically. He couldn't do anything outside of a few, somewhat rudimentary things because his arm, and also just the fact, bad personal empathy, he had fought through all this stuff. And he seems to be clean now, and that's great because there are a lot of ECW wrestlers, former ECW wrestlers that unfortunately did not get over that shit and unfortunately passed away. But Shane and Taz, they built that thing up so much, it was almost like Sting and Hogan, where I don't know if it could match up with it as far as their big pay-per-view. They would have a better match a bit later, where I believe Taz would end up beating Shane. And also Taz had the FTW title and all that, and because he wanted to be a recognized world champion and all that. Now it's on AEW television. It's not a recognized belt. But it's one of the 50 million belts the company has. He would then team with Tommy Dreamer, and this would kind of be the end of Shane Douglas and ECW. They would team up against the Impact players. I believe that was Storm Incredible at that time. And Heyman owed Shane a lot of money. I've never been able to nail down exactly how much it is, but it seems to be in the neighborhood of about $50,000 to $60,000, possibly more. I wouldn't be too surprised, and that's the thing that's fucking ridiculous, is people broke their bodies. And Heyman, who I love as far as being the wise man, he's a tremendous manager. I don't know if he'd be on my Mount Rushmore of managers, but he's definitely very, very good. But Heyman owed a lot of people a lot of goddamn money, and to me, never really got to pay, as far as karma-wise for all the shit that he had people do. I'm just saying. Yeah, they made the choice to do it, but Heyman also was like, oh, you should do it, you should do it, you should do it. I'm going to motivate you, and then they do that, and then if they get paid, it'd be a pittance. Sometimes they get their money, but it would be months later. But anyway, he joined WCW again a couple months later. He was diminished. Yeah, he could still talk. He looked imposing, but then he would get injured because of the aforementioned issues and all the stuff I talked about. The Revolution stuff, he wanted to cut the cancer out of WCW. That was referring to Ric Flair because of all the issues he had with Rick. And the Revolution was never featured as much as it should have been. And whether I'm a fan of Shane Douglas or not, they should have been featuring more young talent because by 99, after the Finger Poke of Doom, they should have been featuring a lot more talent before. I watched WCW in its entirety. Nitro, Thunder. I mean, I never really got around to watching as much Saturday Night Worldwide Pro, that kind of stuff. But the main shows and the pay-per-views, I would go over to a friend's house to watch at least some of the pay-per-views, or I'd get the VHS tape later. Yes, that's how old I am. Couldn't record shit on DVD back in 1999. Well, you could, but it's difficult. And then they weren't featured as much as they should have been. He beat the Wall Brother at Sold Out 2000. And then, because Creative had nothing for him, he wasn't actually back until almost 3 months later. The infamous reboot episode where it's the New Blood versus the Millionaires Club. The New Blood, not the Young Blood. Like certain people said on the Dark Side of the Ring episode. You'd think that Russo would have remembered his own stuff. So, quick thing about the Radicalz. The Radicalz they went to WWF January 31st, 2000. And they were featured in the front row. They attacked. And they beat up, I believe, the New Age Outlaws. Eddie would suffer an elbow injury very soon into his run. I can't remember if it was the following SmackDown or what it was, but it was very soon after. And they would do these attacks, and these attacks didn't last all that long as far as, in the canon and the calendar run of the year, as opposed to the non-calendar run of the year. They would then have tryout matches. They lost every single one of these tryout matches, and this is all at the hands of Triple H, the McMahon-Helmsley regime. And then the Radicalz would join Triple H. And then would be featured in a couple matches at WrestleMania 2000. Eddie had the Mamacita thing going with China. Saturn and Dean. Dean would be in the light heavyweight division. Saturn would be kind of floating. So what if Shane Douglas had joined them? Because Shane certainly did some stuff in WCW. What if he had joined them? He could have teamed with Saturn. They could have gone after the tag titles. He could have teamed with Dean. They could have gone after the tag titles. Because the light heavyweight division and the light heavyweight title by that point was goddamn dog shit. They had the Gilbert thing that didn't work out all that well. It was a fun thing, and I got nothing against Dwayne Gill. Nothing against him at all. I know he had health issues within the past couple of years, and I'm glad that he seemingly has recovered. Seems to have a good attitude about it. Shane could have teamed up with either... Eddie, I think, would have superseded Shane there, but could Shane have got along with Triple H, which I assume still because of the Click stuff? Shawn Michaels was still kind of around there, here and there. Not as much in 2000. Now, maybe he would have been able to by, 2002. But take a look at what Shane did as far as his WCW run. And what he ended up doing after that. I believe he might have been part of the World Wrestling All-Stars a little bit, but then he was in NWA TNA. He threw up during a hair versus hair match against Raven, I believe, in 2003. Taking a look at this, Dean offered a whole lot more physically, even though he was out, I think, by right after WrestleMania 17, if I remember right, because of a neck injury and just overall wear and tear. Shane could have gone after the tag titles. Maybe, because they were hot potato and titles around, maybe he could have been a European champion. That wouldn't have meant anything. Shane would have flamed out within 6 months or a year. He might have been able to go to WrestleMania 2000. He might have been, part of a random multi-man match at WrestleMania 17. But, to summarize this, even though I kind of built all this stuff up and gave this history, I don't think Shane Douglas would have really lasted very long. He would have gotten paid more. They would have marketed him better. But do you think that Shane Douglas would have really lasted that long in WWF at that point? with the physical state of him, the state of that individual, no. Now, maybe he would have been able to be a backstage agent. Maybe he would have mellowed out. I don't know. He seems to have mellowed out now. But looking at what he did in NWA TNA and looking at the stuff that he still tried to wrestle, I think he faced Christopher Daniels in 2009. He wasn't capable of doing anything physically by that point. They were having to hide him in, matches like when he was facing General Rection and, various other people that he was facing, and he was limited physically. He wouldn't have worked out in WWF. I'm sorry, he wouldn't have. I want to give the overview and the history and talk about that stuff, but at the end of the day, they're really, when I sat and thought about it, wrote down some notes like I was looking at, I couldn't really come up with many scenarios where he was going to be able to do anything. Do you think that Shane Douglas would have lasted in WWF? What do you think he would have done? Do you think he might have challenged for the WWF Championship, maybe on one house show? But you think The Rock could have gotten anything out of Shane Douglas? Do you think Triple H and Shane Douglas might have been interesting given the Click history and stuff like that, but no. And Austin coming back, Austin versus Shane might have been interesting as far as the promos. He could have been part of the 2001 Rumble. Would have been better than including some of the people they included, even though I love that Rumble. But yeah, I don't know if Shane would have necessarily worked out. That being said, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Ritland. I'll see you soon.